morning and welcome to the Earl Ingram Show. As always, you can join us at 844-967-2789. That's 844-967-2789. Text us at that same number. Good morning to you, Calvin, my friend. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good, Earl. How are you?
I'm doing fine, man. Preparing for the big day on tomorrow as we'll be joined in studio in the 8 o'clock hour by United States Senator Ron Johnson. He's going to be here from 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. We're going to be taking calls. We got a lot of questions we want to ask of the senator. We want to thank him, number one, for accepting our invitation to appear on civic media, especially in person, here at the beautiful studios at 540 AM WAUK in Waukesha. And for those of you in the listening audience, we're going to implore you once again, if you have any questions that you want us to ask of United States Senator Ron Johnson, go to civic.audio/Earl. That's civic.audio/Earl. And if you have done that before, we had some issues with it. I implore you to do it again so we make sure that we have access to your question as we're able to then, based on the amount of responses we get to certain questions, those are the questions we're going to focus on more than any other, and make sure that the senator's visit is one that we want to make comfortable. I'll say this before we go to our guests. We have not invited the United States Senator to civic media. We have a responsibility. I have a responsibility to live up to what civic media stands for. And so we are not going to tolerate disrespect towards the senator on the air. And we can have we have a right to disagree with anyone, but we have to do that in a respectable manner. I want to begin again. I want to repeat this again: civic.audio/Earl, if you'll be so kind. But I want to begin. It is Black History Month, and I am honored to have an opportunity to bring, just special, very special people who have done some great things with their life along the line of Black history. My guest today is one of those. He is a former professor at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee Area Technical College. He's taught at UW La Crosse. He's taught at North Carolina Central. He is a history professor, a military history professor, a constitutional history professor, and worked in the Department of Africology. He is an all-around, very well-educated, a former military man, but more than all of those things, a man that I can call my friend. He's done some great things. His family is certainly well-educated, and I am honored to bring to you this morning my friend, all the way from Charlotte, North Carolina, Professor Bob Harvey. Good morning to you, Professor Harvey. How you doing, sir?
Earl, how you doing?
I'm doing fine, man. It's always good, Professor Harvey. I'm trying to get the audience to prepare for class, because, anytime you get a chance to sit down in a classroom with Professor Bob Harvey, you should take a pen and take notes, because you clearly have done some great things in your life. How's the family, Professor Harvey?
The family's doing well. How is yours, Earl?
Fine, Professor Harvey. Let me ask you left a beautiful place like Wisconsin where it was cold and I know you love the cold weather. And you moved down to a warm place like Charlotte, North Carolina in retirement. Why?
Well, because the part of that last presentation you just made, Earl, is a lie. I didn't care for the cold weather. When I got sick and tired of the snow. When my snowblower quit on me in 2013, in December of 2013, it quit on me, and I really realized it was time for me to go. So I retired from MATC, and then after that, I left, and I had known about Charlotte for a long time. I knew I was going to retire. So in 2013, I turned 66, and I decided it was time to go. I moved down here, and then a year and a half later, my wife and the rest of the family followed. So we after 28 years of living in Milwaukee, and we lived in La Crosse for 2 years. Well, I did, and she stayed for 3. And then I moved to Madison for a couple of years doing advanced graduate work. And then she moved to Milwaukee and went to Marquette and got a PhD. And then, of course, I moved to Milwaukee. We got married in Milwaukee in '84. And so we spent about 28 or 29 years in Wisconsin.
You know, Professor Harvey, why history? Why was history so important to you, and why did you become a professor of all these different segments of history?
I taught it. I got my start at Historical Black College, North Carolina Central University in Durham. That's where I was born and raised, in Burlington, North Carolina. And I attended, elementary and high school in the Jim Crow era in Burlington, North Carolina. And then I left there and then went on to North Carolina Central in 1965 when I graduated from high school. And I spent 4 years there in undergraduate, and then went and stayed there and got my master's. And in 1972, I started teaching as a graduate assistant, teaching African American history and United States history. So I taught those two for about 7 years. And then in 1978, I was invited to go up to UW-La Crosse to teach in the Minority Studies Institute along with Dr. Carter at La Crosse, University of Wisconsin at La Crosse. And I taught that for 2 years, and then I left there and went on and did some graduate work down at the University of Wisconsin in Madison for 3 years. And then I came to Milwaukee, and there I taught part-time in the Department of Africology, teaching basically African American history. And then, of course, I got accepted to teach at MATC. I did that for 9 years, and that's where I retired from teaching American and African American and history and minority studies. So, I've been teaching, basically African American, United States, and minority studies history off and on for about 25 years. Those 4 institutions.
You know, Professor Harvey, you spent some time in the military. Let's talk a little bit about what you did in the military.
Yeah, believe it or not, Earl, while I was doing my graduate work at University of Wisconsin at Madison, in the summer of '82, I was turning 35, and about a week before my 35th birthday, I decided I was going to, because that was my last shot. That I always wanted to be in the military. I just had school.
Right.
And so I decided I was going to be all I could be, and decided I needed a job for the summer, and this was my last shot. So I went ahead and joined up. And because they were giving the $2,000 bonus for infantry, because they were short of infantry people, so I signed up for the infantry school. And ended up going down to Fort Benning for 13 weeks of intensive training. At that time, they had started a new program called OSUP, One Station Unit Training. Since Bennett was the infantry school, and I had signed up to be in a bit 11 Bravo, we spent 13 weeks of hell down at Fort Benning. And I turned 35 while I was down at Fort Benning. And I went through that extensive training as the oldest guy in the damn company. And then I ended up making platoon guide, which is an honor to the lead platoon when the drill sergeants are not there. I did that, for the 13 weeks. First, I was an assistant platoon guide, and then at about the 9th week, they made me the platoon guide. So, I went through that training, and then because of my teaching background, I was assigned to the 84th. Since I was from Milwaukee, I was assigned to the 84th Division over there on Silver Springs,
So
as an instructor, and for 12 years, I taught basic light infantry weapons and tactics.
Professor Harvey,
I
have to get you to hang on a second. I didn't realize that you joined the military at 35. I joined the military at 22, and I was the oldest person around at 22. And you're telling me, and it was tough for me at 22. I couldn't even begin to imagine at 35, you're with 18-year-olds. Hold the thought. We'll have you respond on the other side. I'm so excited to bring before you, a renowned professor this morning, and we are going to touch base on a whole array of things. My good friend, Professor Bob Harvey. Stay with us. You are listening to the Earl Ingram Show on 540 AM WAUK and 101 FM The Show on Civic Media.
The Shaw, WAUK.
Civic Media and the Shaw 101 FM presents the Max Inc. Radio Concert Series featuring Iron Plow. Iron Plow with special guest Bony Fingers, Friday, February 16th at Maddie's Bar and Music Lounge, 200 Madison Street in Waukesha. This is a free event. The Max Inc. Radio Concert Series with Iron Plow and Bony Fingers, presented by Civic Media, the Shaw 101 FM, and Max Inc. Radio. We are local music.
Connecting the dots between the left and the right. Rational Revolution with Chris Elfheim, Saturdays at 2 and Sundays at 1 on the Shaw, 101.1 FM and 540 AM WAUK, and on the Civic Media app.
Fear you may be missing out? We're always streaming on TuneIn and the Civic Media app. Enjoy listening live or catch up by finding the podcast at civicmedia.us or wherever you enjoy listening to your podcasts.
The
All right. Welcome back to the Earl Ingram Show. As always, you can join us at 844-967-2789. That's 844-967-2789. Good morning to Oshkosh Air Support, WISS 11. 100 AM and 98.3 FM, as well as WGBW 1590 AM, 97.9 FM in Green Bay. I am joined by Professor Bob Harvey, just a great friend, and over and above that, just a great educator. And we're going to take a walk down America's history from the perspective of African Americans. You know, Professor Harvey, let's begin our journey with, the history of blacks in America, and how and when that all started.
Well, there are a lot of scholars who, like reading Jerome Bennett's book Before the Mayflower, they look at 1619 when when blacks, well, 1622 actually, when blacks first arrived on the shores. As some of them were slaves, and some of them turned out to end up being freed. Others were indentured servants, because the first incarceration of blacks in the United States via England and the Dutch, they were considered indentured servants. But by 1660 in this country, actually the colonies, they weren't a country at the time, but the colonies, the 13 colonies, they ended up by 1660 blacks being slaves for life, and whites came over there and continued to be indentured servants. But you miss a major, and I always tell people we miss a major part of history if we just focus on 1619 and 1622 for African Americans. Because by the time we get to that time period, when the English arrived, the Spanish were already here. The Spanish were the ones who really introduced African slavery through the African slave trade to the Western Hemisphere. You got to realize that of the 13 countries that make up South America, 12 of them are settled by the Spanish. The other one is by the Brazil is by the Portuguese. So those two countries from the Iberian Peninsula in Europe, they're the ones who introduced African slavery via the transatlantic slave route, beginning in the late 15th century. They started coming over with slaves. When Columbus arrived, Cortez and all the conquistadors, and all those guys started arriving, they brought Africans with them, some slaves, some free. And one must remember that the African imprint on the Christian nations of Spain and Portugal go way back, because at one time, part of the Iberian Peninsula, at least the southern half, was under the control of the Carthaginians. Now, in case people don't understand anything about Carthage, the Carthage civilization was an African civilization. Carthage and Hannibal and that whole group with the Punic Wars with the Romans, they actually colonized parts of the Iberian Peninsula. And then, of course, later on, between 750 and 1492, Moors from North Africa invaded the Iberian Peninsula and held on to it in parts of it, for about 600 years. So the African influence on Spain and Portugal was very powerful. So they knew about Africa long before England and France and the rest of them got in on it. And they're the ones who brought slaves over. And so by the time we get to the late 16th century, which are the 1500s, you already have Spanish colonies where slavery was introduced, including in Florida, not in present-day Florida. As far as South Carolina, near the area called the PD River. And if you go down 85, in down here in the south of Interstate 85, you run across over the PD River. That's where the Spanish had their colony. So there's a history there. And when they explored the West, out west, the Spanish explorers, and went as far as Arizona and Nevada, blacks were with them as slaves, as servants, as scouts. they were with the Spanish. So the African American connection goes way back. So when we just look at when they arrived in that Dutch ship in 1616 in the 1620s, we're missing a major part of history. So blacks have been here for a long time. And then there's another theory that's out there called the Malayan theory that says that a Malay king and his fleet of ships sometime around 1312 sailed westward and came to what is now South America and settled. But that's the Malayan theory. There's a whole lot of proof other than the fact that those stone heads that you find near the Yucatan Peninsula, or those stone heads, they're African because they have wide nose, thick lips, and woolly hair. So those stone heads. Many say that those scholars say that those are African. Now, how they got there, what was done to those statues to come there? Maybe they were making an impression of the people that they had seen, whoever the inhabitants were. But that's a part of history too that oftentimes is lost, and we still haven't explored that yet.
Professor Harvey, I need you to hang on a second. We're going to take a winding journey down Black history this morning. I'm so honored to have on the line, one of the renowned professors of Black history in our nation, Professor Bob Harvey. 844-967-2789 is the number. You're tuned into the Earl Ingram Show. My guest is Professor Bob Harvey, news, weather, and sports.
Noon to 3 on Thursday. Our guest is Keegan Kelly from Crack.com. Obscure sitcoms right here on the Civic Media Radio Network.
Civic Media News. I'm Terry Bell. Here's what Wisconsin needs to know. The daughter of an inmate who killed himself at the Waupun State Prison is suing state prison officials. Megan Hoffman says they didn't give him adequate mental health care and medication. Dean Hoffman was found dead in his cell in 2023 on his 9th day in solitary confinement. He's one of at least 3 inmates who died at Waupun that year. Misinformation is distorting the immigration debate, so says Vina Iyer, who's an immigration law expert. She says the notion that people come to the United States for government benefits is a stubborn misconception.
There are so many laws that actually highly restrict immigrants from getting any type of public benefits or services.
Iyer says the U.S. needs comprehensive fixes to immigration law instead of stricter border enforcement. Terry Bell, Civic Media News. Here's what you need to know closer to home.
I'm Pete with the 60-second Showbiz Beat. Did you know that Snoop Dogg has his own cereal? Neither did I. And Walmart could be to blame. So says Snoop anyway. Snoop says the chain has been hiding his product and keeping it off the shelves. How upset is Snoop over this? He and his business partner and fellow rapper Percy Master P. Miller are suing, claiming sabotage. The rappers claim that the cereal, called Snoop appropriately, was intentionally being kept off the shelves. My only guess is that Snoop's cereal is incredibly nutritious and great for the munchies. Taylor Swift has a new home at Disney. Taylor Swift The Eras Tour will be available on Disney March 15th. The concert film has been available to rent on other outlets, but Disney Plus will have exclusive rights to show it for free with 5 brand new songs. Is it just me, or is Taylor Swift really starting to make a name for herself? For more showbiz fun, tune into Nightlight with me, Pete Schwaba, every night between 8 and 10 p.m. on the Civic Media Radio Network.
Oh, my love, like a precious stone, part of earth, where heaven is rained on. Makes no difference where you are, day or night time. You're like a shining star. How could I shine without you? And it's about you that I am. Whoa, 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 whoa.
All right, welcome back to the Earl Ingram Show. As always, you can join us at 844-967-2789. Text us at that same number. I want to make a quick announcement before we get back to the show. Again, we'll be joined by Senator Ron Johnson in the studio on tomorrow. He'll be here 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. If you have a question or comment that you want to ask of the senator, go to civic.audio/Earl with your question. We'll compile all those questions, and those that are repeated more than not will be the questions we'll be asking, part of the questions we'll be asking of the senator. You can also call in at 844-967-2789. We'll take some of your calls as well. I'm joined by Professor Bob Harvey, a renowned professor of history and all sorts of history in the nation, and we have him here today for the entire show as he talks and takes us down the line of, the history of Africans in America. Professor Harvey, before we had to take a little short rest, but you we're talking about the origin of blacks in the nation, and you were explaining that it certainly didn't. Our history didn't start in 1619. But let's go from the time that slaves wound up on the shores in Jamestown. Let's start from there, and let's talk about that history and where we move from there.
Well, with that history, Earl, we see blacks spreading throughout the colonies. Remember, the original 13 colonies, all of them had slavery until some of them changed course after the American Revolution. It ended pretty much in 1783. But up through that time, from the 1619 all the way up through, for the original 13 colonies, Georgia was being the last of those in 1755. But all of them had slavery. That's what people need to understand. All the way from the New England states, Massachusetts, Connecticut, New Hampshire, all of them, New York, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, along with the southern colonies. They weren't states at the time, they were colonies. All of them had slavery. And after the American Revolution, which ended pretty much in 1781 at Yorktown, but actually ended in 1783 with the official treaty, you find most of the northern states began to move away from actually having slavery. And the southern states of Maryland, Delaware, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and then later on Georgia, those states, they kept slavery and they became the slave kingdom pretty much. But the northern states, all of them, had some deals with slavery. They either had factories that ran the raw products they got from the South, or they built slave ships, especially in the New England colony. They built slave ships that went down to Africa and bought the slaves back. So they all had a hand in it. And even though some blacks were free up north, there was always the fear and the threat that they could be sold back again or whatever. And there were some northern states that once they started dismantling slavery in their particular states, at least up through the late 1700s, they actually sold their slaves back down south. So that is the history of slavery in this country. All of the original 13 colonies had slavery.
Professor Harvey, let me stop you for a second and ask you, what is the difference between enslaved and slavery?
Well, there is no difference except the laws that govern them. But if you're, I don't know exactly how to answer it other than if you're enslaved, then that means that you're a slave.
So
you're enslaved, and that's slavery.
As I was looking this up, it says, what is the difference between slaves and enslaved people? This term is used to place or in place of slave. It more accurately describes someone who was forced to perform labor or services against their will under the threat of physical mistreatment, separation from family or loved ones, or death.
Okay, one of the things people got to understand, and I always tell people, if you're going to teach, when you teach African American or United States history, forget about just Africa, because African American history is United States history. It's just taught from a different perspective, and that's the way I always approach it. But remember that when you talk about slavery, every civilization and culture in world history that sustained over 100 years or more had slavery. So slavery wasn't new. People a lot of times dump on the English for having slavery. Of the 5 major countries from the late 15th century, which are the 1400s, going all the way up until the 19th century. Around 1888, when Portugal finally disbanded slavery in Brazil. During all of that time period, you had people, slavery, the Atlantic slave trade brought millions of Africans to the New World. About 4 million of them, of that number, those millions, were brought to the shores of what is now the United States. And after 1660, every slave that was in the United States was considered to be a slave for life, what they call durante vita, slave for life, forever. And keep in mind that some of the first Africans that were brought over in the 17th century, which is the 1600s, many of them came over, well, some of them came over as indentured service. And they were indentured service along with whites. Remember, there were a lot of whites that came over from England, from France, from Germany, from the Netherlands. When they came over here, they could not afford the trips. At least some of the poor whites couldn't. So they were made indentured service. They had to work it off. And so you oftentimes, during that time period, you oftentimes had blacks and whites as slaves, but they were under what they call indentured servitude. They had to work it off. But by 1660, that changed. And thus it became a racial component in it that if you were African, you were to be a slave for life. Now, the other thing that had an impact on this was religion. The Catholic Church, which is what most of the Spanish slaveholders were, there were policies where you had to treat the slave a certain way because they were Catholic as well. And as a result of that, they had some pure rights for their freedom if they could buy it. But under the slavery in English America, which Jerome Bennett called Dante's hell of slavery, because there the Protestant movement had an impact on it. And the Protestant movement, saw them as heathens and infidels, and there were no quarters. I mean, it was open season for them. So when you talk about the difference between slavery and servitude, there is no difference as far as I'm concerned. Slavery is slavery, and like I said, you can't. It's wrong to just blame the Europeans. Every civilization in Asia, Africa, and in Europe, even in Australia, you have a form of slavery. So that part, and you can't put a racial component to that. It existed. It's not. I'm not saying that it was valid, but that's the history. There's nothing good about taking another person and controlling their lives and enslaving them. Nothing. So you can't even dress it up. So Africans had slaves.
So Professor Harvey, so now we're here. Now we're on the shores of America. Now it begins from the perspective of generational enslavement of the African people on this continent. Walk us through what that period was like.
Well, that period, and certainly you hit it with starting with the 16th century, because that's when the Spanish introduced them. But let's go through the eyes of English America.
Okay.
Because that's really what we were focusing on. Because if you go into the other one, you go into Frank Tannenbaum and others who describe slavery in South America. Remember, slavery in South America was more widespread than it was in the United States. Most of the people of African descent that were brought to the Western Hemisphere, that's North America and South America and Central America, most of the slaves that came to the United States were taken to South America. And the largest contingent of African people outside of the continent of Africa is in Brazil, not the United States. So in the United States, as I said, by the time we get through to the American Revolution, from 1775 going all the way up through the 1783, you had blacks who were slaves, and the American Revolution, making all men free with the Declaration of Independence and the whole bit, The northern states, and there were 7 of them, those northern states felt that it was not in their best interest to maintain slavery. Some of them kept servants for life, but the economy simply went in a different direction for a lot of different reasons. But down south, tobacco was a major product, and the rest of the world, especially Europe, needed that product, and also the northern part of the country. And as a result of that, that slavery stayed, and it grew, and it dominated politics from the late 18th century, which are the 1700s, all the way up through until the American Civil War. And then, of course, the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865 and the 14th Amendment in 1866, which abolished slavery with the 13th, and citizenship came along with the 14th.
So, Professor Harvey,
So-
we're gonna, for the sake of time, we're gonna jump all the way up to the Civil War, because there's so much history here. We're gonna try to get you to, in this short window that we have, to, entail upon our listeners. And so, just for the sake of time, when we want you to get up to where the Civil War came into play. My guest is Professor Bob Harvey. You can join us at 844-967-2789 if you want to join in this conversation.
You sure do shine, diamond girl. You sure do shine, diamond girl. You sure do shine, diamond girl. You sure do, sure do, sure do, sure do shine.
Black History Stories will offer thoughtful answers all month long. Now, here's Earl.
You cannot talk about Black history without including some of the early music and art which flourished in the 1920s and 30s, time now called the Harlem Renaissance. But this new Black cultural identity was growing everywhere. Trumpet player Louis Armstrong moved to Chicago. Painter Henry Tanner was accepted into the Academy of Design. Musician Robert Johnson recorded the Delta Blues in Texas. Listen for another Black history story right here on Civic Media. I'm Earl Ingram.
Saturday in the park, I think it was the 4th of July. Saturday in the park, I think it was the 4th of July. People dancing.
Good morning to the tap, WZZ8EP 93.5 FM in Eau Claire, as well as the Eagle, WLCX 1490 AM, La Crosse, Wisconsin. You're tuned in to the Earl Ingram Show. As always, you can join us at 844-967-2789. We're honored to have on these precious airways a good friend, but one of the preeminent history professors in our nation, Professor Bob Harvey. And as it's Black History Month, we're having a conversation from one of the best. Professor Harvey, so slavery's here. The 13 colonies in the South are waxing rich. Slavery has now been generational, and they wanted to spread to the north. Now, you said earlier that there were already northern states that had slaves, which is, I mean, so what? Why? I mean, why did we wind up uh, in that situation when we already had slaves in the north, and the north was so opposed to it?
Be opposed to it. Keep in mind that all of the original 13 colonies had slavery. They had statutory slavery. All right. So, but the American Revolution created some issues with those northern states, and also the northern states didn't have the agriculture. The northern states, the colder ones, they couldn't grow tobacco
Right.
and other agricultural products to sustain them. So, just by evolutionary process, they ended up abolishing slavery. But in the South, from Delaware, Maryland, all of those states below the Mason and Dixon line, they all stayed in the Union, but they also had slavery. They kept slavery. And that's where you get your divide that eventually leads to the American Civil War some 60 years later. Keep in mind that eventually what you're going to have that caused the Civil War starting in 1861 was, number one, the election of Abraham Lincoln as the first Republican president. And part of his campaign speech was he didn't talk about abolishing slavery. He talked about the expansion of slavery. He didn't want slavery to expand. And the expansion was taking place in the West. But there was something else that happened during that time period. In 1857, you had the Dred Scott decision. And with the Dred Scott decision, not only did it say that blacks had no rights that any white person was bound to respect, but something else that the Dred Scott decision did was to say that if you were a slave master who lived in Tennessee, or if you lived in Mississippi or wherever, or Louisiana, you could take your slaves and go above the Mason and Dixon line, and you could keep your slaves anywhere in the country because you were a citizen and your slave was a property. Remember, in the Constitution of the United States, in Article 1, Section 2 of the Constitution, it tells you or talks about black people being 3/5 of a person. We weren't even a whole person, nowhere in the country, slave or free. The 3/5 clause in Article 1, Section 2 is not removed until the 14th Amendment is adopted years later. So let's understand this evolution of slavery. Slavery is the primary cause of the Civil War. When Nikki Haley stumbled on that, she should have known better, being governor of South Carolina. South Carolina was the main culprit that led to it, but it was not just South Carolina. South Carolina seceded first in 1860. But the moment Lincoln got elected and won the nomination, the moment that happened, South Carolina made plans to secede from the Union, followed by 6 other southern states: Georgia, Florida, Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana. Those states left with them. And then later on, Arkansas, Tennessee, North Carolina, and Virginia followed, thus making up the 11 Confederate states that left the Union. 4 slave states stayed in the Union: Missouri, Kentucky, Delaware, Maryland. Those 4 states stayed in the Union. They were the border states. They kept their slaves. And the reason why Lincoln didn't want to touch them getting rid of their slaves is because he didn't want them to leave the Union. Remember, in 1860, there were a total of 31 states in the Union. California came in, making it the 31st. And those states, if you take those about 4 states and they join the Union, now you got 15 and 16. And Lincoln felt the war would have been lost before it even started because half the nation would have left the Union. So the issue around the Civil War was the expansion of slavery. Thus, in fact, slavery was the principal. It wasn't the only cause, but it was the principal cause of the Civil War. So when today, with DeSantis and many others talking about this woke crap and this critical race theory concept, trying to avoid teaching Black history because they don't want to recognize the fact that fighting over Black folk was the main cause of the Civil War. And not only that, but the Civil War led eventually in its conclusion, after 4.5 years of fighting, led to the passage of the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery forever because the North won. And on top of that, in 1866, they passed the 14th Amendment. And then in 1869, the 15th Amendment, which gave Black men, not Black women, not even white women, it gave Black men the right to vote. And the reason why the 15th...
Professor Harvey, I got to get you to hang on. Trust you're enjoying this great conversation with one of the most renowned history professors in the nation, Professor Bob Harvey. News, weather, and sports.
Can you dig it? Yes, I can. And I've been waiting such a long time for the day.
Earl Ingram Show, weekday mornings from 8 till 10 on The Shaw, 540 AM and 101.1 FM WAUK. This is your hometown radio, refreshed, keeping you informed, entertained, and connected locally across the Civic Media Network.
This is Chuck Smith, founder of Current Electric. I want to thank you, Southeast Wisconsin, for making us #1 electrical service company in our area. From residential and commercial to all things solar. Do you know the #1 reason people call Current Electric? It is trust. We answer the call. They trust our heroes in their home and businesses. With 8,500 5-star reviews and growing, I'm so very proud of our team of heroes. Go to callcurrent.com. That's callcurrent.com, home of the superheroes.
You're listening to The Shaw, WAUK 540 AM Jackson, W266DR Waukesha, and always streaming on the Civic Media app.
CBS News special report. The military says 5 Marines aboard a helicopter that crashed during a storm near San Diego Tuesday night are dead, and crews are beginning the grim task of recovering their remains. CBS's Eleanor Watson.
These were the Marines aboard a helicopter that was flying from Nevada to California and was reported overdue when it didn't land at its expected time in California. The aircraft was located yesterday in the forest about 45 miles from the air station where it was expected to land. That was after about an 8-hour search, and local authorities said the snowy conditions, the windy conditions really were a limiting factor in getting to the aircraft.
An investigation into the cause of the crash is underway. In a statement, President Biden says he and the First Lady extend their condolences to the families of what he calls 5 of the nation's finest warriors, along with their squadron and the Marine Corps. CBS News Special Report. I'm Deborah Rodriguez.
Your news, conversations, and a whole lot of fun. It's all on your local Civic Media radio station or the Civic Media app.
Civic Media News. I'm Terry Bell. Here's what Wisconsin needs to know. President Biden and Donald Trump are tied in Wisconsin in the latest Marquette University Law School poll at 49% each. In a 5-way race, third-party and independent candidates get 22%.
I think it reflects the broad dissatisfaction with both Trump and Biden as the matchup. And so people unhappy with that are expressing it by saying at this point they'd vote third party.
Poll director Charles Franklin on the Devil's Advocate Show. The Wisconsin Council on Problem Gambling says it expects more calls for help with the Super Bowl coming up Sunday. Executive Director Rose Blazinski says today's increased accessibility to sports betting means more people are in danger of developing a gambling addiction. Anyone who thinks they need help is urged to contact the council. I'm Terry Bell, Civic Media News. Now here's what you need to know closer to home.
For WAUK News, I'm Stuart J. Waddles. One kid on a Walworth County bus involved in a crash yesterday needed to be taken to the hospital. Injuries are believed to be minor. It happened at around school release time on Highway 11 near 43 in the town of Lafayette. The 68-year-old bus driver is fine, with the other driver behind the wheel of an Elantra taken to the hospital. A passenger in that car was okay. It's not clear what caused the impact. An investigation is ongoing. A grocery store in Walker's Point in Milwaukee is closed. Health officials say there are numerous code infractions at the Cermak Fresh Market, and it was temporarily closed yesterday. Cockroaches and mice were reportedly discovered inside the store. The owners have until February 20th to address the problems, according to the health department. And that's what you need to know. I'm Stuart J. Waddles, WAUK News.
The Devil's Advocates Radio Show.
Jam from Racine, welcome. What do you got for us?
Hey, Jam.
I voted for Reagan back in the day. I guess I've been supporting more of the Democratic Party for the last 40 years or so, but people don't say, oh man, she's a Republican, she's a Democrat, she's a whatever. I'm a human being. All these other things aren't important. We need to unite against a bigger threat. I think the threat is us becoming a dictatorship. They want us to fail.
The Devil's Advocates Radio Show. Weekday afternoons from 4 until 6 on your local Civic Media radio station and on the app.
The Badgers lose again. Hi, I'm Mike Clemens with sports. Men's college basketball, the Wisconsin Badgers losing to Michigan 72-68. Wisconsin has now lost 3 in a row. That's their longest losing streak of the season. The Badgers struggled with 3-point shots, played poorly on defense. They're ranked 11th in the nation and losing in Ann Arbor to a Michigan team that came into the game with a 5-game losing streak and a record of just 8 wins and 15 losses. The Badgers, now 16-7, play Rutgers this Saturday. Baseball, the Brewers adding some players. They've signed right-hander Jacob Junis to a 1-year deal, and they've also added catcher Gary Sanchez from the Padres to a 1-year contract worth $7 million. And now former Brewer Colin Burns saying so long to fans in Milwaukee after being traded to Baltimore.
Obviously thank the fans, thank the organization. That's the only organization I've been a part of up to this point. Had a lot of winning seasons, a lot of good baseball over there. Felt honored to be a part of the best stretch of baseball in Brewers history.
That's the Orioles' Colin Burns. With sports, I'm Mike Clemens.
Did you know this local radio station is part of Civic Media? Learn more about the entire network at civicmedia.us.
Cloudy and mild with scattered light rain possible today. We'll get to around 53 for a high this afternoon. The wind out of the south at 15 to 25, gusting to near 30. Tonight, scattered light rain. Otherwise, partly cloudy, 41. Tomorrow, sunny, 50. Saturday, sunny and cooler, high near 38. I'm meteorologist Sean Cable. Right now, it's 39.
Covering all the news that affects you with humor and a unique perspective. Matinaire on Air with Jane Matinaire. Weekdays 10 till noon on the Shaw, 101.1 FM and 540 AM WAUK, and on the Civic Media app. Up North News Radio with Pat Kreitlow, Wisconsin's home for daily conversations about the state's latest headlines and stories. Weekday mornings from 6 till 8 on your local Civic Media radio station and on the Civic Media app. Did you know this local radio station is part of Civic Media? Learn more about the entire network at civicmedia.us. Waukesha.
Somebody, somewhere, tell her it's unfair. Can I get a witness? Can I get a witness?
All right, welcome back to this very special edition of the Earl Ingram Show. As always, you can join us at 844-967-2789. You can text us at that same number. I can't sit still, Calvin. You keep up the good work. But I want to say, if you're just joining us, tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, we'll be joined in studio by United States Senator Ron Johnson. He will be here from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. If you have a question that you would like to ask of Senator Johnson, go to civic.audio/Earl. And even if you have done that before, I think you should do it again. We had some technical difficulties a little bit earlier in the week, but we want to make sure we get your question. Again, civic.audio/Earl. So today is a very special day. It's Black History Month, and I have, again, one of the renowned professors of history in our nation, my good friend, Professor Bob Harvey, all the way from Charlotte, North Carolina. You know, you can join us at 844-967-2789. Professor Harvey, before, we had to take a little short hiatus, you were going into the Civil War. And I want you, because you've always pointed out, I've learned so much from you over the years. The Civil War was the bloodiest war in our history. 620,000 people lost their lives from 1861 to 1865. I want to contrast that with World War II, 1939 to 1945, with all those different weapons and that we had, and 405,000 people died in a world war. In World War I, 1917 to 1918, 116,000 people perished. So without question, the American Civil War was the bloodiest war in our history.
Yeah, well, that's true, and it shows you just how intense it was. And the story behind that also is that the Confederacy lost about 210,000, and the North lost about 420,000. Of those 420,000, 38,000 of them were African Americans. Black soldiers, 180,000 of them joined the Union during the Civil War. 38,000 of them died. 20 of them won the Medal of Honor for battle. So when people talk about blacks being liberated, they helped to liberate themselves. And when I did research on blacks in the military, wrote my master's thesis in 1970, 71, and 72, I was shocked to find out that not only did they win the Medal of Honor, but that they also served with the Confederacy. See, they don't show that. Now, in the movie Glory, they show blacks going in there, cleaning up the battlefield, picking up the dead, but the Confederates used them too. I had a professor, down at North Carolina Central, Dr. Brewer, who wrote a book on blacks in the Confederacy. And he, when writing his book and doing his research, he indicated that the South wanted to use them, but they were afraid to arm them. Just like it is today, they're still afraid of black people having guns. That's why they went after the Panthers so hard. So when those blacks, if they started arming them, by the time they did it, Earl, it was too late. It was by 1864. In the North, the Confiscation Act of 1862 allowed the Union to go ahead and start recruiting blacks. And they showed up in large numbers, most of them. In some cases, over 90% of those that made up the regiments and the divisions in the Union Army were runaways. They ran away from slavery and joined the Union Army. And and many more were also labor battalions that worked with the Union Army to clean up the battlefield, to dig the ditches, and the Confederates used them too. And this is one of the things that always bothers me about a lot of these movies. They don't show the role that blacks played before, during, and after battles that were fought. But all of them, those battles, and all those struggles in the Civil War has a lasting impact on us. It explains a lot about white anger and anguish today. Some people in the South, especially in the South, that's why you see the South when you look at it in elections, It's a solid red. And it's mainly because many of those people are still fighting the Civil War. They still are carrying some of the hatred that was left over because the federal government came down and changed them forever and took away a lot of their social context. And part of their social construct was having slavery, black folk. And in fact, even after the war, when it was all said and done, one of the reasons why they had to pass the 13th Amendment was to abolish that powerful institution, because the greatest money-making industry in the South was slavery. Tobacco started waning as a major product by the 1820s. But by the 1820s, you start seeing the emergence of a new agricultural product, cotton. And it was needed in Europe and all over the world where you had industries that needed warm clothing. And cotton was king. That's why they get the idea of the Cotton Kingdom. And so in that era of the Cotton Kingdom, those 11 Confederate states, they eventually become, after the Civil War, through Reconstruction, they eventually become the Jim Crow South.
So Professor Harvey, I have to, this is a participatory program, and so we've got some callers. Do you mind taking a few callers?
Oh, no, go ahead.
All right. Let's go to Cindy from Appleton. Good morning to you, Cindy. Thank you very much for the call. You say what?
Good morning, Earl. Good morning, Professor. I was just, I'm actually reading a book right now. It's called Mrs. Lincoln's Dressmaker. Seems like the dates are pretty true to what you're talking about a woman named Elizabeth Garland, who was a black person who apparently managed to buy her freedom as a slave. So I wonder if you could just touch a little bit on how slaves were able to buy their freedom.
Great question, Cindy. Thank you very much for the call.
In some cases, for example, if you were under Catholic rule, and there were, like in Maryland and places like that, where you had Catholicism as a major part of the religion, there was a possibility of buying your freedom. And one of the things that I learned about my family was that we're Harveys, and we're part of that clan that Alex Haley came from. And some of us were able to buy our freedom, but for the most part, it was difficult to buy your freedom in the South. But those who did, they had a difficult time living in the South, because there were only in 1850, there was somewhere in the neighborhood of around 100,000 black folk that lived in the South, and that were free. But John Hope Franklin, his book From Slavery to Freedom, calls them quasi-free Negroes, meaning they were only partially free. But he also noted that even up north, where slavery had been abolished, they were just only partially, because they didn't have a lot of rights, they couldn't vote. But the ones that did buy their freedom, they were much better off than those who were slavery for life. And it did happen more and more up north, because of the fact that you had Quakers and some of the other religious groups of the Protestant faith that felt that slavery was an evil, and they took part, like Elijah Lovejoy and some others who took part in it. Now, you mentioned something about Lincoln and his a seamstress. Remember one thing: his wife her family was from Kentucky. They owned slaves. So Lincoln's wife came from a family that owned slaves. In fact, she was vehemently opposed to him pushing through the 13th Amendment. And some say that the 13th Amendment, by getting past Congress in 1865, that's one of the things that got him killed. So there's an interesting story there about that connection about free blacks. But yes, there were large numbers of blacks up north who got their freedom, and they helped to fill the ranks of that 180,000 blacks that served in the Civil War. And there were a lot of black nurses. Nobody talks about them either. Black nurses that went on the battlefield along with white women to serve as nurses for the Union Army. And the Confederates had theirs as well.
Professor Harvey, we've got some callers that we'll make sure we get to. 844 967-2789. Stay with us. Very special morning on the Earl Ingram Show. Professor Bob Harvey is in class, and he's in rare form. 844-967-2789. You're tuned into the Earl Ingram Show at 540 AM WAUK here in Waukesha. Civic Media Platform.
Let me hear you say, I'm early in the morning. I wake up all night. I took the fine out all night that I've been crying. But I believe a woman's a man's best friend. So I'm gonna stick on her till the very end. 'Cause she caused so much misery that I forget how love's supposed to be somebody, somewhere. Tell her it ain't fair. Can I get a witness? Can I get a witness? I want a witness. Witness, witness. Witness, witness. Everybody knows, especially you girls, all the love can be said, but half of the love is twice as bad. And now all the chicks agree that this ain't the way it's supposed to be. Let me hear you. Let me hear you say, yeah, yeah, yeah. I want a witness. I want a witness. Come on, witness. Come on, witness. Witness. Come on, witness. Witness. Yeah. Hey, why don't you just stop trying to be so cool and let me know the lowdown how you feel about things? Oh, you ain't doing nothing but jive, baby. We've got a very serious problem, yeah. Come on, baby.
All right. Welcome back to the Earl Ingram Show. As always, you can join us at 844-967-2789. Text us at that same number. Very special edition of the Earl Ingram Show. My very special guest, Professor Bob Harvey, is on the line. Let's go to the phone lines. And Eric from Wauwatosa, good morning to you. Eric, how you doing, sir? Thank you very much for the call. Thank you for listening.
Pretty good. Thanks for taking my call. And hello, Earl, and hello, Professor Harvey. I'd like to say that, unless you read Derek Bell or James Baldwin or at least, Toni Morrison or similar, citizens of this country really think about the continued legacy of American chattel slavery. And I personally believe, you spoke earlier about the Dred Scott decision, and I believe the Dred Scott decision lives on in that I believe white folks still don't feel as if black folks have any rights that we have the need to respect. And of course, an altered version, but I believe that still lingers as a legacy of that decision and enslaving black folks in general. You can see it on both a national as well as local level. And I'd like you to comment on that. And also I'd like to ask if Professor Harvey could explain how the U.S. courts, and this may have even been in the 1700s, how they changed an enslaved child's legal status from determining it based on who their father was to who their mother was, which basically guaranteed a lifetime of enslavement and also helped male slave owners, obviously mostly white male slave owners, profit from this shift in the law. And if Professor Harvey could explain that to the rest of the listeners as well. Thank
Stephen,
you.
man,
I'll hang up and listen.
great questions. Professor Harvey, you want to respond?
Yeah, and in terms of the idea of the shadow slavery or slavery for life, what we call the Rati Vita, keep in mind that Malifa Asante, in this book, African American History, A Journey of Liberation, talks about that transition. John O. Franklin also talks about it in his book, From Slavery to Freedom. And so does Jerome Bennett in his book, Before the Mayflower. They both talk about, all of them talk about the idea of making that transition from, just regular chattel slavery to a point where you could get your freedom after working it off. That was through indentured servitude, to the point that by the beginning of the 18th century, which is the 1700s, the first decade, actually between 1660 and 1710, you see all of the original 13 colonies. It wasn't just the southern colonies. Keep in mind that you don't have a United States until after the American Revolution. So it wasn't a Supreme Court. It may have been the local courts in the colonies that oftentimes were overseen by the British government. But they recognized the importance of separating white indentured servants from black indentured servants, because they were getting together causing a whole lot of trouble. And when you mix Native Americans who were right in the area, a lot of times it caused some problems. But the separation, having black folk as slaves, the one thing you could always do, you could always tell that they belonged in the institution of slavery. So the mindset in all of the original 13 colonies, this is something that the mindset that Americans need to come up with. All of the original 13 colonies that fought in the American Revolution, all of them had slavery. And that's something that's oftentimes missed. We look at the southern colonies, and keep in mind they're not states. They don't become the United States until 1781, when you have the creation of the Articles of Confederation, the first governing document of the American people. From 1781 to 1789, the document that governed the American people were the Articles of Confederation. And it was a weak document because it didn't have a strong central government. The Constitution that we drafted between 1787 and 1789 did that. It created a federal government through Article 1 through Article 3. And one key other point, in the Constitution, you can't help but deal with the issue of slavery. In Article 1, Section 2, that's the 3/5 clause. That's in the Constitution. Every time you open up a book, any book on the United States Constitution, read online or go to the library and get a book, or go to the bookstore and buy one, a U.S. history book. In the back, they're going to usually have a copy of the Constitution. It reminds the American people that the 3/5 clause did not refer to Native Americans. It referred to the African people. And why did they have the 3/5 clause? The 3/5 clause in Article 1, Section 2 basically says that they're only 3/5 of a person. They're not even whole. Why did they do that? Because the Southerners had so many slaves, the Southern states had so many slaves, that they felt that they needed to count them. In every Southern state, when they finally embedded the Constitution and ratified it in 1791, every Southern state benefited from the 3/5 clause because they got at least one representative. So it was important for representation. So for about 40 years before the Civil War ends, what you find is that blacks are being represented. They're sending people to Congress. They can't vote for them, but whites can, because they count black folk in their population. The House of Representatives is based upon population. So they were getting free representatives in Congress, and black folk had no rights and powers whatsoever.
Professor Harvey, hang on a second. Let's go to Stephen from Green Bay. Stephen, quickly. Thank you for waiting.
Yeah, I just wanted to share an experience that I got to have. My family and I went down to South Carolina for a trip, and we went to this plantation that sold a harvested a very rare grain called Carolina Gold Rice. And in there, this used to be a plantation where slaves were kept, and they actually made it into a museum to teach about slavery. And in there, they had the original houses that the slaves were kept in, and they put our whole group in there, and they had us all standing there all at once. And they said, "Now imagine you're eating here, you're sleeping here, you're doing all your business in this place." And we were packed in there like cattle. And it was at that moment that I started bawling in the middle of it, because it wasn't until that moment that I realized the way that those human beings were being treated, and it just completely shattered me as a person and made me realize how horrible the slaves were really treated. You can't get that out of a history book. I had to go and actually live it. And if you get the chance to, I think it's something you should definitely check out for yourself.
Hey, Stephen, man, thank you very much. Professor Harvey, we'll let you respond. 844-967-2789, a very special edition of the Earl Ingram Show. Professor Bob Harvey, Black History Month, civic media. You're tuned into the Earl Ingram Show, news, weather, and sports.
It's time for you to stop playing with my feelings, girl. It's come on.
Noon to 3 on Thursday. Our guest is Keegan Kelly from Crack.com. Obscure sitcoms right here on the Civic Media Radio Network.
Ayer is an immigration law expert. She says misinformation about refugees' motives is making matters worse.
We're concerned about those folks trying to cross unsafely, being exploited.
Ayer says a southern border crackdown will make things more dangerous for people seeking asylum. I'm Terry Bell, Civic Media News. Now here's what you need to know closer to home.
For WAUK News, I'm Stuart J. Waddles. The attorney for the person of interest in the Elkhorn double homicide is on the record about his client. Thomas Rout Jr. is the person of interest in the deaths of Gina and Emerson Weingart. The attorney identified Rout. He has a history of felony convictions, including a bar break-in and arson. He was paroled early in 2020 and subsequently enrolled at Gateway Technical College. He appeared in a promotional video for the school last year, discussing his efforts to turn his life around. Rout is currently on a parole hold in jail and has not been charged in connection with the recent homicides. New construction is coming to the Milwaukee Harbor to help commerce in the region. About $700,000 is being allocated by the state to a Milwaukee Harbor effort that involves a new loading dock and fixed crane. About $3 million is being invested in projects in Manitowoc. And that's what you need to know. I'm Stuart J. Waddles, WAUK News.
Radio keeps your community informed, entertained, and connected. It's what we're all about at the Civic Media Network of local radio stations.
We're having fun and moving fast to preserve hometown radio across Wisconsin. This includes a commitment to news. Now we want to invite you to join Civic Media's exclusive Facebook group, Wisconsin Breaking News. It's a place to share your community's news and chat with others from across the state about it.
Join the Facebook group Wisconsin Breaking News today. It's the perfect companion to your local Civic Media radio station.
I'm Pete with the 60-second Showbiz Beat. Gus Fring, also known by his real-life name of Giancarlo Esposito, star of Better Call Saul and Breaking Bad, will play the lead in a new show for AMC called Parish. The show is a thriller set in the town of New Orleans. While speaking at a recent presser, Esposito called New Orleans a city of demons. On the show, he plays a luxury car dealer who will take them all on. Car salesman versus demons. That's a tough one. The series premieres March 31st, and I will be watching, as the network AMC has a lot of street cred. Looking for a new show? Check out Fool Me Once on Netflix. Variety reports that the show just became the 9th most viewed English-language TV show ever on Netflix. The show follows Maya Stern as she tries to solve her husband's murder. For last week alone, Fool Me Once was the 4th most watched show on Netflix, which is exactly when I had the pleasure of binging said program. Love me some color television. For more showbiz fun, tune into Nightlight with me, Pete Schwaba, every night between 8 and 10 p.m. on the Civic Media Radio Network.
I'm meteorologist Brittany Merlot. We've got it all today. Unseasonable warmth as highs soar to near 50, thanks to strong winds gusting out of the south up to 35 miles per hour. We'll see pockets of sunshine, cloudy skies, scattered showers, and even a chance of thunderstorms later this afternoon and into the evening. Currently, it's 39.
Up North News Radio with Pat Kreitlow.
Now I guess I'm just rooting for Kansas City because it's more about Travis Kelce and Taylor Swift for me.
It is at this point, and I want to congratulate Taylor Swift for making the Super Bowl in her rookie season. There's not a lot of rookies in the NFL who make it all the way to the big game, but she did, and you know if they win, she's getting a ring.
Up North News Radio with Pat Kreitlow, weekday morning 6 till 8 on your local Civic Media radio station and on the app. Whether you're heading down Les Paul Parkway or
Day after day, I'm more confused. Yet I look for the light through the pouring rain. You know that's a game that I hate to lose. And I'm feeling the strain. Ain't it a shame? Oh, give me the beat, boys, and free my soul. I wanna get lost in your rock and roll and drift away. Oh, give me the beat, boys, and free my soul. I wanna get lost in your rock and roll and drift away.
All right, welcome back to a very special edition of the Earl Ingram Show. As always, you can join us at 844-967-2789. You can text us at that same number. Again, tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., we'll be joined in studio by United States Senator Ron Johnson. If you have a question you'd like to ask of the senator, go to civic.audio/Earl. And let us know what it is you want us to ask of Senator Johnson. And you can also call at 844-967-2789. He's going to take calls. But I think you have a better chance of, going to civic.audio/Earl and getting your question in than probably the phone lines, because I'm pretty sure it'll be jammed. My guest is none other than Professor Bob Harvey, renowned history professor. And Professor Harvey, before we go back to the phone lines, two young men, Eric from Tulsa, Stephen from Green Bay, young white men who know history. And Stephen was talking about right before the break, Professor Harvey, about his visit to South Carolina in one of the quarters where slaves were held. This is at the same time, you see the value of those young men knowing history, that they want to take this away, Professor Harvey. Your thoughts?
Well, that's the whole thing about this. First of all, they had that critical race theory thing. They threw that out there for a while. And once they found out what it meant, they stopped that, if you've noticed. And then they went right to woke. And DeSantis made that part of his campaign platform. But now all the Republicans have embraced it, it seems. You know, the word woke, if you break it down to this acronym, it means way of knowing. And that young man standing in that slave hut, or even going through and maybe visiting one of the court down in South Carolina where they used to sell slaves. All of those can be moving tributes to what America needs to know about slavery. That's the same as also going on the Indian reservation and seeing how Native Americans were pushed from their land. You know, from in 1830, the governor of the United States had passed, the Congress of the United States passed the Indian Removal Act, signed into law by the 7th President of the United States, Andrew Jackson, who also owned slaves from Tennessee. And they, you know, had those Native Americans packed up and shipped off to Oklahoma. You know, so we need to know these histories. You can't sit there and squash that. The great success story to this is that those young men are exposed to something that they would never have had it been erased and done away with. The bad news is that many people in this country, because there are about 20 states now that are they're planning on adopting some form of the woke concept.
Right.
They're going to be producing dumb children. The United States makes up only about 7.2% of the world's population. They're going out into a world where the majority of the people are people of color. And they're going to be running smack dab into cultures and civilizations and societies of people that are completely different from them. And going down this blind alley of learning a white nationalist ideology, because that's what it is, a white nationalist ideology, erasing history, is going to make their children and our children too dumb, just plain dumb.
Professor Harvey.
And it's a travesty.
Professor Harvey, hang on. Professor Cassandra from Madison, I want to introduce you to Professor Bob Harvey. You have a question for Professor Harvey, Professor Cassandra?
Yeah, Earl, thanks for taking my call. And Dr. Harvey, it's a pleasure to have you on the show today and have you recount our history, because it is being suppressed, the African American history right now. I was looking at some information about our veterans, particularly our Black veterans and our active duty military veterans, because I am a veteran. I did serve. And were you aware that during the Persian Gulf, 30% of the military personnel serving in the Persian Gulf War, 30% were African American. In general, 25% of Army soldiers are African American. Now, at this time, the military, they are not hitting their recruitment numbers. And the reason for that is because the demographic population of both whites and Blacks are declining. And the demographics of Latinos or Hispanics, they are increasing. And their military service numbers, it is not comparable to other racial groups. And so, what really bothers me about this attempt to wipe away our history is that our contributions are not being acknowledged as they should be. And number two, we're not getting accurate information out there. We should only be discussing allowing people in the country who are eligible to serve in the military and who can secure our national defense. African Americans have done it all throughout this country, and other demographic groups must do so as well. And I will listen offline to you. And thanks for coming on the show.
Professor Harvey?
Yes. Well, quickly, keep in mind that in the Vietnam War, Vietnam was the area that I focused on for about 8 or 9 years doing research on it. And people don't realize that blacks made up 10% of the population, but they suffered 20% of all combat deaths in Vietnam. They suffered 22% of all of the total casualties, which means missing, captured, or killed. And so we made up only 10%, but we were bearing a brunt of the deaths. And I interviewed the blacks who were returning from Vietnam in the 1970s, and they were saying that in some cases, probably 30 to 40%, and sometimes even 90 to 100% of the patrols that went out in Vietnam were black. But if you take a look at movies that the Platoon and some of the others, they don't even show that. You hear nothing about it. And there's not a day that goes by, because military history is one of the areas that I focus on. And, like Ms. Sanders, I spent 12 years in the military. 6 of them was as a drill sergeant with the 84th Division, teaching in the Leadership Academy, but also, going on military posts, training soldiers. And as a training NCO, whether you're on a platform, on a range, running it, as a drill sergeant, you still see the importance of empowering young African Americans to go the military route. But what's sad about that is that we're losing so many young black men in so many different areas that they don't even make it up there long enough to get of age and join. That's one of the tragedies. And I don't know what could be done totally in our community to help out with that. Maybe, just maybe, having recruiters go into these schools early. When they're juniors, when they're freshmen and sophomores and juniors in high school, and let our military men show up to encourage them to join and show them some of the benefits, because they do have great benefits. I mean, it's not many places where any young person, black, white, Asian, Native American, or Hispanic, there's no other profession where a person can go in at age 17, get their 20 years in. When they come out there 37 years old, they can start another career or either get an education because the GI Bill is there.
With full benefits.
I mean, I've used mine to buy a house two different times. So there are benefits. But we have to let them know that.
Professor Harvey, hang on. Let's go to Tom from LA. Good morning to you, Tom. You have a question or comment?
Good morning. First off, we the people ultimately are the government, and we must never forget that. Second, thank you for the master class. As always, Professor Harvey, because every time you're on, it's just a breath of fresh air and education. So thank you. I'm a person that believes that, we should have national service. It shouldn't be, just listen to Cassandra. I don't want it to be where we're segmenting the population again, Latinos from Black people, from whoever. All people should be giving 2 years of, I think, national service, because it might make people wake up to the fact of what is actually going on inside of our government. Because, I don't want certain groups of people being used as cannon fodder for these wars that happen in the name of oil or happen in for the billionaire class. So I just really believe that we have to get money out of politics, and we have to get the lobbyists out, because to me, that's what's really destroying this nation.
Hey, Tom, great points. Thank you very much for the call. Professor Harvey, you want to respond?
Yeah, quickly, keep in mind that that's one of the things that I aspire to too. I don't recite it as much and push it as much, but I think there should be a national service for us, because one of the tragedies, nobody talks about this. No one talks about this. Not the military people, the politicians. Nobody talks about the fact that we keep using the same troops over and over again. There's a burnout that takes place there. You can't get there and survive all of the wars, the change in environment. And those guys do those sometimes 5 or 6 time tours. You can't keep sending people in hostile environments like that. And the reason they're doing it is because we have a shortage of military personnel. Those 3 young soldiers that were killed over there in Jordan,
right?
A week or so ago, they were reservists. The reserves very seldom see active duty like that. Not overseas, but we're short of personnel. You get the National Guard that may be involved there, and then the regular personnel, because you got 3 different types of enlisted personnel. You got your regular, your National Guard, and your reserves. The National Guard is basically state. They're run by the state. The reserves, that's a federal entity. I was in the reserves. And National Guard would go before we would into active duty. And that's what we've done. We've used those people up over and over again. And now we're going down to the reserves. And that's a danger, because your reserves are supposed to be designed in an emergency to go in and train other troops to go overseas and join the regulars, and in some cases the National Guard. Now, to get the National Guard, the federal government has to federalize them.
Professor Harvey, I got to get you to hang on. 844-967-2789. Very, very special edition of the Earl Ingram Show. My good friend, Professor Bob Harvey. It's been too long. It's my mistake. I got to make sure I have him on more. 844-967-2789 is the number.
Home for Nightlight with Peach Waba.
The Todd Alba Show.
The immigration challenge in this country, as Jorge Ramos, the great author, likes to say, you can build as many and high walls and deep walls as you possibly want. But until you start addressing the problem within countries, people will keep coming. For all of our faults, people still look at America as that shining city on a hill and want to come here, and I believe that makes us stronger.
The Todd Alba Show, weekdays noon till 2 on your local Civic Media radio station and on the app. The Todd Alba Show.
You look at Taylor Swift, she fought off the bitterness of defeat when she lost her records, when she was kind of duped by a manager. People who told her she'd never amount to anything. But it doesn't matter if you like her music or not. I'm a fan of anyone. Doesn't matter whether they're an artist or an athlete or just a common Jane or Joe. If you've overcome something in your life, you're a winner. If you've made it through, that's what it's all about.
The Todd Alba Show, weekdays noon till 2 on your local Civic Media radio station and on the app.
On a Sunday afternoon, really couldn't get away too soon. I can't imagine anything that's better. The world is ours whenever we're together. There ain't a place I like to be instead of moving down a crowded avenue.
All right, welcome back to what is, I can't believe, the last few minutes of a very special edition of the Earl Ingram Show. My good friend, Professor Bob Harvey, who it's been far too long, and we're going to bring him back certainly this month. Let's go to the phone lines, and Cassandra's back. Cassandra, you wanted to say?
Yes, thanks, Earl, for picking up again. I just wanted to reinforce Professor Harvey's statement about the military and let your callers know that there is such a shortage of military personnel that the Pentagon is asking people to return from retirement to fill slots. And the shortage is so severe. The reason why we lost those 3 African American servicemen from the reserve is because Pentagon policy states that 40% of active duty military personnel must remain in the United States for home defense. We do not have enough people for home defense and to cover all of those military satellites or bases that we have overseas.
So, Cassandra, here's what I'll do. I'll reach out to some military friends that I have and have them come in, and we'll do a special show on that because it clearly warrants it, and I'll definitely do that immediately. Thank you very much for the call, Professor Harvey. We haven't even. Go ahead.
Go back and take a look at this thing. People don't realize that since World War II, the United States has been, except for a few down periods, we've been in constant conflict. And look at all of those deployments they got out in what they call the Middle East, which is Western Asia. Right now, you've got almost 20,000 American troops over there, including our special ops, because there are special ops people over there. Believe me, your SEALs, Delta Force, Special Forces, Marine Corps, special ops, CIA special ops. Those kids are over there. They're already over there doing everything that you can think of, sabotage and spying, collecting information. They're over there. But the sad thing about it is we're suffering a burnout because they've used those people too many damn times. That's too much. But all those wars that we fought in Vietnam, they did do the draft. And yeah, I know a lot of drill sergeants. I know as a drill sergeant, we were always told that soldiers that volunteered were the better ones to train, and that's the ones you look for. So they went to a volunteer army. Well, draft army, you can tell the ones that are drafted because those kids, you got to deal with some of them, a recalcitrant attitude where they don't want to do this or that. And the thing is, though, with them, once you got them straight, they were excellent, just as good as soldiers as the ones who volunteered. But unfortunately, we got away from that. And the military patting ourselves on the back, and we're now dealing with regular Army personnel who are not individuals that are civilians that are drafted. They went to the volunteer army, and they burned those kids out. We should never ever. And I fought all the presidents from actually from Obama all the way up, who sent those kids into those combat zones more than once. The Gulf War and the Afghanistan conflict, those conflicts have lasted for well over 20 years, and it's burned those kids out. So we need to find a way to get out of that, or either go to the volunteer army for about a year or two. That'll get some of these kids off the street, and I guarantee you something else will happen. If they're to keep them getting drafted, they'll flood our colleges to get away from them, so that they don't have to get drafted. I was during the Vietnam War, and I stayed in school, and I got drafted 3 different times between 1968 and 1971. But I was in school at the time, and I had the grades to show for it. So I was able to get around it. That's why I wanted to join once I got in graduate school at University of Wisconsin at Madison. And I decided I wanted to join, and I volunteered for the reserves because I was still in graduate school. But the burnout rate, and then, of course, other things that are happening in the society. And now we got this woke movement we're gonna have to start getting some dumb kids if we don't stop that mess
So,
to go to something else.
So, Professor Harvey, it's been too long. I deserve a beating. I deserve a thrashing because since I've been here at Civic Media, I haven't had you on. And I realize it's been far too long. We didn't get to where we are coming up to after the Civil War. So I'll be calling you back in the next week or so to have you take us from the Civil War to the civil rights movements and even up until today. Because when we talk about Black history in this country, we cannot leave it at the Civil War. But thank you very much. I'll be in touch with you. I really appreciate it. That's Professor Bob Harvey. And I want to say again, tomorrow morning we'll be joined in studio by United States Senator Ron Johnson. If you have a question that you would like to ask of the senator, go to civic.audio/Earl, and you can get that in, or you can give us a call at 844-967-2789. Calvin, great job as always. Thank all of you who took the time out to listen. I promise you we're going to keep on doing this. Up next, Madnair on air, Jane Madnair and Greg Bosch. See you later.
I feel it coming closer day by day. Life would be